In the early 2000s, Nicolas Cage wasn't just a movie star, he was cinematic royalty, an Oscar winner, a blockbuster magnet. From Con Air to National Treasure to Face Off, Cage's face was on every billboard, and his bank account reflected it. He was earning tens of millions per film, and instead of hiding that wealth behind investments or gated mansions, Cage did something far more unorthodox and far more Cage. He bought cars, not just daily drivers or luxury sedans. He dove headfirst into the world of ultra-rare, impossibly expensive, borderline mythical machines. We're talking about a Ferrari Enzo, one of only 400 ever made. A Lamborghini Miura SVJ, the unicorn of Lambo collectors. Multiple Rolls-Royce Phantoms, each customized. And perhaps the crown jewel, a Bugatti Type 57C Atalante. A car more at home in a museum than any garage. To Cage, these weren't just toys. They were extensions of who he was. Symbols of freedom, rebellion, and raw, unfiltered adrenaline. He once said in an interview that a car should make your heart race before you even turn the key. And his collection reflected that philosophy. Each vehicle wasn't just purchased, it was curated. But it wasn't just what he bought, it was how fast he bought them. At one point, insiders estimated he was purchasing a new vehicle every few weeks. Ferraris, Bentleys, vintage muscle, European exotics. He didn't discriminate as long as it was rare, fast, or historically significant. To the outside world, it looked like the ultimate car dream. But inside that dream, cracks were already forming. Because while Cage had the passion of a true enthusiast, his financial empire was far less stable than his garage floor. And behind the engine, roars and collector praise. A silent threat was building. One that would force him to make a choice no car lover ever wants to face. Owning a Ferrari or a Lambo is one thing, but what Cage created was something else entirely. It wasn't a collection. It was a sanctuary, a rolling art gallery. And just like the man himself, it was eccentric, theatrical, and deeply personal. Cage didn't park his cars in some ordinary garage attached to a home in Beverly Hills. He housed them in climate-controlled vaults, plural, across multiple estates. Each facility was tailored to the needs of these rare machines: humidity-controlled air, security systems built like bank vaults, even custom lighting to highlight the car's sculpted lines. Some sources say he had vehicles stashed across 5 different properties, including homes in New Orleans, Las Vegas, and Newport Beach. At the peak of his collecting, estimates suggest Cage owned more than 50 high-end vehicles. The list reads like an automotive fantasy. Porsche 356 Speedster, a nod to classic Hollywood cool. Jaguar D-Type replica, pure motorsport history reborn. Lamborghini Diablo 5T, outrageous, overpowered, unmistakably 90s. Ferrari 250 GT, old-world elegance at 6-figure price tags. And yes, even a handful of American muscle legends, including rare Mustangs and Corvettes. But it wasn't about value alone. Each car meant something. To Cage, these machines weren't just transportation. They were emotional anchors. He once compared collecting cars to collecting characters. They each have their own voice, their own energy. You don't just drive them, you feel them. He wasn't a flipper. He didn't buy for prestige. He bought because he felt something when he looked at them. Because in a world where everything was fast and fleeting, the cars were real. Machines that responded only to passion, not politics. And yet, even a collection built from love can't survive the weight of a collapsing empire. For most celebrities, the downfall starts slowly. A canceled movie here, a bad investment there. But Nicolas Cage was never most celebrities. When his spiral began, it was explosive. Behind the polished paint and million-dollar metal, his financial life was quietly spiraling into chaos. By the mid-2000s, Cage wasn't just collecting rare cars, he was hoarding everything. And not just automobiles. He bought 15 homes, including a Gothic castle in Germany, a haunted mansion in New Orleans, 2 luxury mansions in Rhode Island, a private island in the Bahamas. Then came the truly strange, a 70-million-year-old dinosaur skull, a collection of shrunken heads and even pyramids. Yes, pyramids, to eventually house his remains. At first, Hollywood laughed. "Classic Cage," they said. But then, the IRS came knocking. In 2009, the government claimed he owed over $6.3 million in unpaid taxes, mostly tied to the years when he was buying the world. Suddenly, the rumors weren't funny anymore. He tried to sue his business manager, blaming him for negligence. The manager fired back, saying Cage ignored every warning and kept spending like the money would never stop flowing. But the flow had stopped, and the reality was brutal. Cage was no longer the king of quirky extravagance. He was cornered, forced to make a choice between his treasures and financial survival. And the first things to go? The cars. The moment the headlines hit, Nicolas Cage forced to sell off car collection. Collectors everywhere perked up, not just because the cars were rare, but because they were his. One by one, some of the most exotic vehicles in the world quietly began appearing on elite auction lists and collector forums, often with no official attribution, but everyone knew the truth. Among the most painful losses, Ferrari Enzo, a 12-cylinder rocket, sold under financial duress. Estimated value, over $1 million. Lamborghini Miura, SVJ, one of only a handful ever built. It was gone within days. Bugatti Type 57 C Atalante, a pre-war legend that once belonged to royalty. Rolls-Royce Phantom Drophead, custom finished to Cage's exact specs. The auctions were brutal. While some cars fetched massive numbers, many were sold below value, because they had to be. It wasn't about market timing, it was about liquidation. And the worst part? Buyers weren't just paying for the cars. They were paying for the story, the legend of Nicolas Cage's collapse. To own one of his vehicles was to own a piece of Hollywood myth, wrapped in leather and carbon fiber. Even his lesser-known rides, like his custom motorcycles and muscle cars, were swept up in a collector-feeding frenzy. To Cage, each auction slip was a cut, not just because of the value lost, but because these machines meant something. They were part of his identity. Now, piece by piece, that identity was being auctioned off to the highest bidder. And the most devastating part? The most meaningful cars hadn't even hit the block. Yet, not all cars are created equal. Some are investments, some are trophies, and some, just a few, are pieces of your soul. For Nicolas Cage, those weren't the ones with the highest dollar value. They were the ones tied to memories. At the top of that list, a 1955 Mercedes-Benz 300 SL Gullwing. A machine so timeless, so elegant, it's often described as rolling sculpture. To Cage, it wasn't just a car. It was cinema on wheels. He adored it, drove it sparingly. When it sold, insiders said it wasn't about the money. It was about letting go of something irreplaceable. Then came the Shelby Mustang GT 500 Eleanor, a replica from Gone in 60 Seconds. the film that redefined Cage as an action star and cemented his car guy legacy. That car wasn't just prop metal, it was a symbol. It connected his love of film and his obsession with machines. Letting it go, like selling the climax of his own movie. And then there was the Lamborghini 350 GT, the very first production car Lamborghini ever made. Cage had tracked it down specifically for its historical significance. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't loud, but it meant something. Each of these sales wasn't just a transaction, it was a wound, a quiet goodbye to another part of himself. It's one thing to sell off a luxury item, it's another to watch a piece of your identity drive away, knowing it's not coming back. And yet, he had no choice. The walls were closing in, the debts were mounting, and there were still more assets to liquidate. The world was watching, morbidly fascinated, but few realized the emotional toll behind every signature. Every auction wasn't just the loss of a car, it was the loss of a chapter in a life that once felt limitless. When the headlines broke, the reaction was immediate and vicious. Tabloids ran wild, Cage's castle crumbles. From millionaire to motoring meltdown. Fast cars, faster fall. To the media, it was a spectacle. Another Hollywood cautionary tale. Another star who flew too close to the sun and came crashing down in flames. But behind closed doors, the response was more complex. Fellow car collectors? They quietly swarmed the auctions. Some saw opportunity, rare machines, now up for grabs. A few were respectful, most weren't. There were stories of collectors lowballing prices, knowing Cage was desperate to sell. Cage became a punchline. His name evoked eccentricity, not excellence. He went from Oscar winner to internet meme almost overnight. But the fans were torn. Some mocked, some mourned, and others, the ones who truly understood his love of cars, saw it for what it was, a tragedy. Not of excess, but of loss. They didn't see a man who blew through millions. They saw a man forced to surrender the things he loved the most. For Cage, the public scrutiny wasn't the hardest part. It was watching everything he built, every car, every memory, every symbol of his identity, disappear. And still, he didn't break. He disappeared. He regrouped. And slowly, he began to rebuild. After the cars were gone, after the castles were auctioned, after the tax liens and lawsuits had been settled or silenced, Nicolas Cage did something unexpected. He stepped away. The man who once lived on movie sets and behind the wheel of multi-million-dollar machines went dark. No more red carpets, no more luxury headlines, no more extravagant purchases. Instead, he turned toward something quieter. He began taking indie roles, gritty, raw, unglamorous. Films like Joe, Pig, and Mandy proved that beneath the eccentricity, the man could still act. Stripped of Hollywood spectacle, Cage reminded the world why he ever mattered in the first place. In interviews, he started speaking differently, humbler, softer, reflective. In one candid moment, he said, "It's not about how many things you own. It's about finding what really matters." He never denied the love he had for the cars, but he began to understand the cost of loving them too much. And while the garage doors remained closed, people began to wonder, would he ever build another collection? Would he ever return to that world of horsepower and heritage? The answer would come, but not in the way anyone expected. Because the new Nicolas Cage wasn't about flash. He was about focus, And while he no longer had a warehouse full of exotics, he still had the heart of a car guy. The difference now? He finally knew where the brakes were. Today, the Nicolas Cage that once chased Bugattis and castles lives very differently. Gone are the climate-controlled garages. Gone are the velvet-roped vaults and multi-million-dollar halls. What remains is something quieter and perhaps more real. Cage now lives a far more minimalist lifestyle by choice. No longer hoarding ancient artifacts or bidding on haunted mansions, he's retreated into something resembling normalcy. He's been spotted driving a Subaru WRX, a humble all-wheel drive rocket adored by gearheads but leagues away from a Lamborghini. Other sightings include a Jaguar XF, a refined but modest choice compared to his past fleet. And yet, there's still that glimmer. That same glint in his eye when he talks about machines. The same reverence when he mentions the purr of an engine or the shape of a fender. Because, while the excess may be gone, the passion isn't. Cage still attends the occasional collector event, not as a buyer, but as a quiet admirer. He doesn't need to own anymore. He simply appreciates. Friends say he still follows auctions, still bookmarks cars he finds interesting. But these days, there's no urgency to possess. He finally understands what he didn't back then. You can love something without owning it. In a world where celebrity is often tied to image, Cage made a different turn. He stepped off the gas, downshifted, and found a kind of peace he never had in his prime. Because sometimes, it's not about how fast you go. It's about knowing when to slow down. You might be wondering, what happened to all those iconic machines? The Enzo, the Miura, the Gullwing, Eleanor. They didn't disappear, they scattered. Some were snatched up by deep-pocketed collectors. Others were sold at prestigious auction houses like R.M. Sotheby's, Gooding and Company, and Pebble Beach. The Bugatti Type 57 C Atalante now reportedly sits in a private European collection, rarely driven, but meticulously preserved. The Lamborghini Miura SVJ, rumored to have doubled in value since its sale, now tucked away in an oil tycoon's private showroom. And Eleanor, the Gone in 60 Seconds legend. It's changed hands multiple times, each new owner claiming a piece of cinema and celebrity history. Some of the more obscure pieces, replica motorcycles, custom muscle cars, ended up in obscure garages, auctioned off with little fanfare. But true enthusiasts? They know. They track serial numbers. They whisper in forums. They remember. Because owning one of Cage's former cars isn't just about the vehicle. It's about the story it carries. They're artifacts from a time when Hollywood collided with horsepower. A moment when an actor lived his own action movie, one VIN number at a time. And while Cage may never drive them again, Nicolas Cage's car collection wasn't just one of the most extravagant in Hollywood. It was one of the most human. It told a story of freedom, of obsession, of identity. It reflected a man chasing meaning through motion, trying to fill emotional gaps with horsepower and heritage. To outsiders, it looked like reckless spending. To insiders, it looked like heartbreak management. Because the truth is, his garage wasn't about showing off. It was about feeling alive. But when the debts caught up and the auctions began, the legend unraveled. Piece by piece, car by car. Not just because he needed the money, but because he had to let go. And maybe that's what makes the story worth telling. Not that Nicolas Cage once owned a Bugatti, but that he gave it up. that he chose humility over spectacle, that he found purpose in the ashes of everything he lost. Today, his name still pops up when rare cars surface at auction. Whispers of "that was Cage's" swirl through the room, adding an extra zero to the bid. But the real value isn't in the price tag. It's in the legacy. Because for fans, the story of Cage's lost collection isn't about excess. It's about evolution. He was a man who had it all, lost it all, and found something better. Not in a garage, not behind the wheel, but in himself.